This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
Today, we're talking about something we all carry, regret. It has a bad reputation, but maybe it shouldn't. Regret often sneaks in through the rearview mirror, disguised as guilt or shame. But if you lean into it, it becomes something else entirely, a signpost for growth. Hindsight has a way of spotlighting our missteps, and it hurts. But that emotional awareness, it's a gift. Regret tells us what mattered. It shows us where we want to do better. And when we allow ourselves to really feel it, not live in it, but learn from it, it helps us stop recreating patterns that don't serve us. Think of it like riding a motorcycle. You don't stare in the rearview mirrors the whole time, but glancing back can keep you safe, steady, and aware of what's behind you, so you can better navigate what's ahead. That's what regret can do. It's not meant to stall you, it's meant to give you momentum. Shame tells you this is who you are. Growth says this is what you've been through. And no one gets through life without a few emotional crash sites. Don't we know it? If you made it this far without regrets, you might have been parked on the sidelines. So let's talk about it, because sometimes looking back is exactly what helps us move forward. This is the motivation.
I'm actually really surprised. I was thinking about it this morning that we haven't covered this yet, because it's universal, right? It's something that is pretty heavy when you experience it, regret. And my personal experience with it, I realize, has been such an evolution over time, as anything should be. But I grew up with the understanding or the kind of viewpoint that regret was something to like avoid, if anything. And that if you got it all right, you could avoid the regret, because I heard so often from the adults in my life, stories of regret, but I was only hearing the first part of the process. You never really heard them share there afterwards. So this is what I learned about myself. This is how I did it differently. This is the important part of regret, or this is where it can really serve you or empower you. I didn't hear about that. So when I heard people speak and say the word regret, I regret this. I regret this experience. I regret what I did here. I regret what I said here. I regret that I thought that, whatever it was. Then on the backside, it was just this like, and now I feel horrible about it. And it still kind of haunts me to a certain extent, because I was afraid of having regrets and not doing the thing. And then I also, on the backside, if I did or said something that I felt guilt about and stuff like that, I had a hard time taking accountability for it, because then I would feel the regret. Because one of the things that comes with that is when people get stuck in it, they're usually like identifying with it. So when they're not learning from it, they're like, I was a bad person. Maybe I am that. I was a fool. I was a this. Because if I wasn't that, how I wouldn't have done that thing. And so they get stuck in it. So I also was like, well, if I admit to it or take accountability for it, then I'm that thing. I'm that person. And so then I, out of self-preservation, I would try and avoid accountability for a really long time, trying to avoid and skirt regret. Whereas later in life, the evolution of learning, holy shit, actually regret is inevitable if you're learning and growing, because as you see things differently, suddenly I see life through a different lens. And so I see the thing I said back then, man, I would have said that different. I would have done that different, all those different things. But then if you can acknowledge that that was an action, that was a behavior, that wasn't an identifying part of me, that was what I had access to at the time. That's as well as I knew to do at the time. And even if I knew I was kind of being shitty, well, I still was feeling shitty. And that's how I had best access too. No one's walking around trying to do as bad as they can. Everyone's like doing the best that they can for the most part. Yeah. Unless you are a horrible human, and then we're not for you because you won't listen anyways. And that changed things too, because I recognized that the power wasn't in skirting regret. It was in fully feeling it. And I say feeling it because it's so painful at times. My experience with it is, it makes you want to puke sometimes when you see it through a different lens, because you've maybe hurt somebody or people. You've maybe created real damage, and that's hard to know that your behavior or words or whatever it is has done so. But when you learn to like be able to feel that and use that as the momentum to say, then how am I going to do it differently on the other side? How do I use this to tap into a deeper empathy, a deeper understanding? How do I tap into this to be able to have the bravery to do repair? That's the part of the cycle that like I didn't grow up witnessing or watching, and most of us don't. And so that's where we have a very misunderstood and misinterpreted understanding of guilt and regret, because we equate it and don't really understand the difference between like guilt and shame. If you have the regret and you feel guilt that creates the regret, I have that guilty feeling. I regret that decision. That's a guilt around like your moral compass. That's a great thing. Guilt is something that moves you forward, not getting stuck in it, but shame is the identifying with it. I am that thing. And that's where you can really get stuck. And that's where most people do, because of a lack of understanding the kind of bigger picture of the value and the use of, and the reason we have that to begin with. Like, that's why it's hardwired into us, And the people that say like, I don't feel guilty, I don't feel this, sort of thing. Like, yeah, you might have someone trying to put guilt on you and you're like, look, that was my boundary. I'm not going to feel guilty over something that's, but that's coming from a moral, your value system. That is coming from a grounded place. But if you've been shitty and you're just like, not my problem, not going to feel good. That's the avoidance of sort of thing. So having this conversation today, I think is, we were sitting on the beach and I said, this comes up a lot in my working with families. This comes up just with clients, really navigating, looking at the world differently. And it comes up a lot of like that feeling of I am that versus these are some of the choices that I'm having a hard time reconciling. And so when I brought it up to you, Chrissy, you were like, this is wild. I was just talking to somebody about this. And so that's why I'm like, why haven't we talked about this also? And like, I'm glad we are, because we've, it's a pretty tough emotional experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was funny when you brought it up. Exactly that. I quite literally a couple days before had this conversation with my boyfriend, and the way I framed it, because they were sharing an experience that caused them a lot of discomfort still from their past. And I said, it's kind of a beautiful thing, because when you cringe over those past versions of yourself, it's a signal that you've grown. Because if you hadn't grown, you would still not necessarily have peace around those decisions, but you would still, to your point of kind of like, well, fuck them, and the denying and the victim mentality would be the driver versus the fact I'm very uncomfortable over this version of myself that showed up. And I think it makes a lot of sense as to why, when you speak about, the youth that you're dealing with today, still looking at this the same way we did, and similarly to how our parents did, because there hasn't been a lot of active conversation around breaking the cycle. It makes me think of that really iconic meme of the guy with the tattoo that says no regrets, RAGREATS.
Yeah.
And when you kind of dial it down, you're like the permanency of a tattoo, and you think that that's just like the life decisions just ingrained in you forever, glaring and looking awful. But the thing is, you have to think about the steps we're discussing today as getting the touch up that then's going to adapt. You're still going to have the mark of knowing I participated in this thing, but it doesn't need to look the same way. And that's really the powerful tool of regret. Regret isn't just pain, it's insight. And as Lori was highlighting there, guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. I am something wrong. I think of my own mom a lot of times in conversation, where now that I'm starting to disentangle different youthful experiences, one of the first things she says to me, I'm sorry, I was such a bad mom. Where you're like, she's reflecting on an experience where she's identifying in shame, where I'm like, no, let's shift this perspective. But regret is the thing that says, I wish I had made a different choice. I wish I had made a different choice. But how beautiful is it to have that recognition, because it offers us the roadmap then of future change. And when it comes to regret, it's kind of two levels. I was thinking about this when you basically threw the word my way. And it reminded me, and I think actually, Lori, you might have shared some of these in the past, but when they interview people who are in hospice and within their last moments, and a lot of times when they highlight their life, they talk about a lot of inaction regrets. And so in life, we have inaction regrets, things you didn't do, but you wish you had. And often that's fears, unexpressed dreams, misaligned priorities that many of us get stuck in the cycle of. And then, of course, on the flip side, there's our action regrets, things you did that you really wish you hadn't. And those, I think, are almost equally painful to look at, because they both offer so much juice and gold if you take the time to examine them with enough space. I mean, we talk about meditation, for example, is all about creating space between our thoughts, feelings, watching them go by. And I think it's the same thing, creating enough distance to not let our ego identify that this is who I am. It's more begging the question, what can I learn here? How can I show up differently? Why does it trigger me to look at that version of myself? Because at some point, that version of you did what it did, or chose not to do what you thought you should. And to Lori's point, it is funny that we've not talked about it, because I'm sure as we're chatting here, you heard it in the intro. I think every single one of us can think of some very pivotal moments in our lives that this comes up. And you want to know what one of the funniest ones was for me, Lori? It's only funny because it's highly irrelevant to my adult life. But I started thinking in my brain, what are some of my biggest regrets, whether inaction or action? And I definitely have both that straddle the line. And then my brain dug up this memory from childhood in grade 1, where I pulled out, I told the story, Mina Farag's chair from him, like as a joke, and he hit his head, and then I lied. And isn't it funny? I look at that tiny, 6-year-old, and it makes me feel guilt.
You feel it.
I feel it, which is so wild to think that even these young versions of ourselves have this as part of us. And isn't it wild to know what we know, that we carry things we haven't processed through our lifetime? And I found it so fascinating to identify that, to think, wow, that moment still makes me feel like that.
Yeah, all these years, because it's so poignant, right? Of like that, it's such a strong emotion. And one thing that I think is so important that I have only just recently learned and then put into practice is the middle messy zone. And that middle messy zone is what oftentimes is when the feeling comes. Oftentimes, even if we know this, so like we talked about the avoidance or the bypassing, right? Like I'm going to avoid it. I'm just going to go over here and do this thing and distract myself, or tell myself of all the reasons why I'm a good person and this is it, sort of thing to soothe over the feeling of guilt or the feeling of this kind of thing. And again, those will be important things if you are, identifying with it. I am this. You have to remind yourself, well, you're also this and this and this. You're also kind. You're also this. So if you are that, you can't be all of that. So yes, that is a helpful tool. But if you are going through the process of saying, I showed up this way, this was, inconsiderate, insensitive, whatever it is, and the feeling that's coming along with it, right? And That's the feeling to stay with. Now, you're not going to get stuck in it. But what we also do on the backside is if we do know the lesson of it, we do understand that this is to like propel us, learn, move forward. Sometimes and oftentimes we'll also try and bypass the discomfort of the feeling and go, I'll make that call right now. I'll just say sorry right now. I'm going to call them. I'm going to call them. Or if I just can explain what's happened, if I can just tell them so they understand. And what ends up happening is that you're actually doing it in a different way, using that person or trying to bypass your responsibility, your accountability of your feeling by actionable steps on the other side. And then you can actually do damage in a different direction because now you need that person to forgive you or placate you or whatever it is. So you don't have to deal with that feeling. Because what if that person's like, yeah, that hurt. And you're like, no, I know it hurt, but you didn't know that I da-da-da. And then it's like, the person's like, it doesn't sound like you're sorry. It sounds like you need me to absolve you of that feeling. Or you go out and you try and make it right while having the intensity of fear. So I'll just fix it. I'll go do this and I'll go do that and I'll do this. And then you're not actually coming from a grounded, wisdom embodied understanding of it. You're just coming from the fear of the feeling by making it right. And one of the biggest factors, and this was hard, was sitting in the discomfort of the feeling first to allow it to process itself. And when I say process itself is you can feel the difference because emotion is energy in motion. Mm-hmm. So an example of that would be when I was really going through one of my big kind of internal growth spurts, if you will. I was taking a lot of really like wide lens and zoom in looks at all the different parts of my life, who I was, parts of my personality, where did they come from? Are they actual adaptable or maladaptive, which means do they work for me? Do they work against me? How do they show up in relationships? Is that more about me or us or them or blah, blah, blah? And in the midst of that, you then see some stark things that you didn't see before. And you get suddenly all these memories shift in how you remember them. So a conversation with somebody at one time that I felt so fine about, I see where I was selfish and sensitive and say a slightly cruel maybe, or not even cruel, but just like I could just see all of a sudden the pain that I caused through that conversation. And oh my gosh, the feelings and they would wake me up there was about a week there. They would wake me up sometimes with sweats because
I was going to say when you did your intro and you were talking about, when it comes back at you and all I thought of, I was like, these are the moments that you wake up in the middle of the night and then your stomach sinks.
Correct. Because also you got to realize in the nights when your brain's doing the most active processing. So anything that you've kind of reflected on or looked at, your brain continues to do that in your sleep state. Why you wake up a lot of times at 3 a.m. and blah, blah, blah. And I knew at that time in that process that was something that I had to feel like that was going to be part of it. And I wanted to run and hide and make excuses and fix it tomorrow. If I could just make this phone call, then this feeling would go away. And I understood that the point is not for the feeling to go away. You're not taking action to the feeling to go away. You're taking action to do it differently. And the only way you could possibly do it differently is the process first to also feel it. And so I would just breathe into the feeling. It's like a Buddhist meditative, like there's many ways to go about it. My way that I have learned that is the most optimal. And, from just kind of like a therapeutic standpoint, it's very much backed as, one of the most optimal is rather than trying to avoid the feeling, you step away from the feeling, rationalize the feeling. You actually like focus on the intense feeling, not on the thoughts, the feeling. And in a way, it dulls it to a certain extent, again, not to make it go away, but to allow it to fully process without adding to it or trying to diminish it too quickly. And it usually would take like a half hour, 45 minutes, but you could feel the like throb of it slow down. I'd fall back asleep or whatever. And I would do it in the day as well. Still comes up every blue moon when I like have a reflection. But then on the other side of that, when you're regulated and you're grounded in it, that's the time to then say, look, I got repair to do. I got a phone call to make. That's the time you say, hey, I got to look at how I'm going to do things differently, is when you have finished that processing. Because when you do it within the intention or in the intensity, you can end up actually creating a whole new dynamic that actually doesn't serve you or the person or people on the other side. And then you got some new regrets. And to be clear, you're never going to be honest. And I hope anyways, you're never going to be in a place and state where you don't have some form of, man, the way I see it now, I would have done it differently then. But you can definitely, with time, not have the gigantic waves of regret and be able to process more streamlined, not skip steps of it, but have a bit more streamlined versions of how you move through it.
Yeah, honestly, in my own experience, I kind of have examples from two versions of myself. And the first being when you brought this up, it was a time that I maybe had just cracked the tiniest lid off my vulnerability journey, for lack of another term. And you've heard me kind of refer to what that looked like here on the podcast if you're a follower. And it was when I was still working at the TV station, and we had a producer at the time, which, for lack of a better term, was a bit of a tyrant. It just was ego driven, a lot of power. And unfortunately, there was some very, very apparent workplace bullying taking place. And I know that's a term that's tossed around. This was like a personal attack. And the personal attack, where it was truly honed, was my partner in crime that I worked with every day. We spent hours in the car together, shared everything of our lives. Out of any human at that point in time, that's the human I was spending the most time with. And they are just this beautiful light as a being. They're kind, they are compassionate, and they definitely had strong work ethic and did not deserve the level of scrutiny that was happening. It did not make sense. And ultimately, it got to the point that he was like, I have to leave this job as a result of the level of this bullying. And what ensued from there was him going through the channels in a corporate organization, which can be very scary when you're aware HR works for the business. They do not work for you, and filed a formal complaint of formal bullying that escalates to even the provincial level of investigation. And in support of him, so many people were coming on board and adding their names to the case. And I didn't, out of self-preservation, because I was so scared selfishly that if I did that and publicly put my name to that in this situation, that I would lose my job. And I know ethically, morally, things that I witnessed firsthand, I was probably the best account in that investigation to have my name on that. And I remember losing so much sleep even when I was making that decision. I felt sick in the night. And the reason being is because the action that I was taking, which was also an inaction over something that I should have been taking, was highly misaligned with my values and my value system. All the alarm bells were going on, being like, no. But egotistically, it was all about my self-preservation. Well, I need this job. And what if I lose this job? With complete disregard to the individual I should have stood alongside. And I remember us having deeply emotional conversations through this time period. And what happened afterwards, I mean, I will say for his sake, it ended up ultimately the best decision for him. He ended up with a winning outcome in that investigation. The people that did the bullying were held accountable. No one that backed him up lost their jobs as a result of it. So I'm happy that that worked out. But for myself, I had to sit and look and be like, what the fuck? How, over somebody I care about so deeply, could I have made that decision to not stand up for them? How did I allow myself to convince myself that my voice was so small when it should have, that was a prime opportunity in life to use your voice? I am someone that has a career in using voice. So it is a tool that I'm not afraid, or typically something that I would hide behind. And it took me a long time to work through that. Now, I preface that by saying it was in the beginning of my vulnerability crack open. And so when we talk about these things coming with you, and maybe if you're listening now and thinking, I actually identify with what they're saying about the shame part, and I actually identify with what they're saying about the guilt part, maybe I have some unprocessed things that have come with me. When I started my therapeutic journey, even as recently as this year, that's when I was able to really start to disentangle and examine that. And so what Lori's saying is so very true. I mean, sometimes if it's with relationships that we're having, hopefully you're able to process and work on the repair sooner for the sake of your relationship. But my point in bringing that up is that if you're listening to this and it's making you do that mental audit of what are some of my biggest regrets, and you're feeling that intensity and you hear that part that goes, I am that, or I did something wrong, I just want you aware that it doesn't need to always look like that, but it's telling you as a signal there's something to unpack there because there's a lesson to learn. And truthfully, I can say with honesty, I'm not proud of the decisions I made, that version of myself made in that moment. But definitely, if I take myself back to that entire experience and I journaled heavily through it as well, what I do not have is that feeling in my gut that I used to feel when I looked at it, which tells me I've been able to excavate what was kind of harnessed and living in me. And I certainly know, although I haven't been put in a pressure cooker of life situation similarly, a non-negotiable to me in this lifetime now, if I witness an injustice, especially to someone in my circle and my sphere, there is no part of me that is going to stand by and keep my mouth shut. It was a tough lesson, but again, I think it just illustrates the value of actually doing the work versus, it'd be really easy when I looked back at it to just be like, well, it's the bully's fault that all that happened. I played no part in that. If they did this and that would be very easy narrative. But at the end of the day,
all worked out.
Exactly.
I didn't have my name in there and it all worked out. It wasn't needed. And like, maybe that was the right call because it worked out for everybody involved. It could be all these rationales for it. It's that was such a great example because it really is. And one I think is so relatable because more today than ever, where we're really putting in positions where we're trying to find the happy medium of, with viewpoints and political viewpoints and personalized viewpoints and social viewpoints and all these different things that you're like, how do you find that happy medium where you're really not doubling down on cognitive dissonance, where it's like, you're going to find all the evidence to prove yourself right, essentially, or find any loophole and ignore anything that makes you feel uncomfortable in your opinion, and deny of it and have real conversations, but also be brave enough to, if your moral compass is saying something, to be able to say that in a regulated way, and stand behind also, because there is that, like, it's a fine line. But I think more than ever, that example that you just gave is just such a great one of having that feeling that said, hey man, I am putting self first, but not in a way that's like a well-being in my value system, but in as a way of fear-based and ego and, security and all those different things, in a way that, like, I'm negating what really matters to me and I will do differently and I'll have it. Such a good example. One thing too, you said about towards the end there, where you shared, if you're someone listening and you're like, man, I have had that feeling and I identify with it, or I feel that shame around it, and I'm having a hard time moving through that. There's also this part that's like, there's the sneaky bit too, that, and this is where I spoke of at the very beginning. There's a sneaky bit of when you also ask yourself, how often, if somebody brings something to you and says, hey, this is an experience that I had, how often do you jump to, yeah, but you don't get this. Yeah, but I was going through this. Yeah, but you didn't understand this. And also ask yourself, how often are you the person that I feel this way because of that? I feel this way because of them. I feel this way because of this. Because, and not in a way of you should feel guilt and shame. You're avoiding it. But like, yes, you are actually avoiding those feelings, but that's actually a sign that you're likely more identifying with, you're closer to the side of jumping to shame than you are to the power of guilt. Because that's what protects us from if we're people that identify like I was, you're telling me that I'm a bad person. I'm not a bad person. I'll tell you all the ways I'm a good person. I'm going to point out all the things I did do for you. I'm going to point out all the things because you are telling me that I am this, and I'm going to tell you why I'm not that. Whereas you, that person, was telling me your choices and your behavior affected me in this way. But because my mind always had learned and was adapted to making it identifiable, I had to dip, dive, push back, make excuses. And then that's also, whereas I wasn't taking accountability for my emotional state. You made me feel this way. You made me feel frustrated. You made me feel this. This situation did. Because I also, if I had to take responsibility for how I felt, then that meant I am a sad person. I am an angry person. I am a frustrated person. Versus when I learned that, I was like, no, you are more susceptible to frustration and anger. And if you start to get curious about where that susceptibility was learned and built from, could be a bit of it was temperament, just in how I came out of the womb, a little kicking and screaming. But and then there was a bunch of things
like Winston Churchill. My mom self-professed that I was an ugly baby.
You're like, I refuse to identify with that. I blossomed into this flower. But truly, like, that's a big thing. And we hear it more today than ever before, is from people, is the, they made me. You can, and two, like, yeah, there is justifiable behavior that you're like, whoa, this didn't feel great. But it's also one of those things of how much of that were you already primed and ready to be triggered. And so that slight thing that was done, that was like, yeah, it wasn't cool, but it wasn't the like horrific. It feels horrific. Well, how much are you carrying that's primed and ready? Man, was I primed and ready 99% of my day. And so, like, we just talked about this, Chrissy, on the beach. So one of the things that my system is in, because I've been in a state of like survival, there was about a month and a half where I was just in survival with my dad in the hospital, not knowing how that was going to turn out. Then coming back to this like just avalanche of work, which was a wonderful thing to have an avalanche of work, but it's a stressful thing. And then now that I'm out of that and we're in summer and we're busy with summer and stuff like that, my system is still recalibrating. So what comes with that is that my system is primed and ready to see any threats, because there was a lot of threats happening just recently, and my system is it's part of survival. So knowing that, you have to be like, oh, I need a little bit more care, and to create a safe little bubble to remind it that it is safe, right? That said, I'm in the midst of it. And so my system is flagging things that are threats that are not threats. And so I was just telling Chrissy the other day, I was on the way to the dentist, and I've remembered what it was because I couldn't remember at the time. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go a little bit early so I can go for a quiet walk because no one's really out at 7:30 in the morning downtown. And someone on the street started to yell to the person on the other side of the street, call over. And my system went, you shut the fuck up. That's your threat. And I felt so much anger towards them of like, it's early in the morning and he's right there. Walk over. Why do you need to yell? And I had to say out loud, that's not a threat. You're thinking it's a threat and it feels like a threat. It's not a threat. And I had to say it out loud to myself because I couldn't even say it in my brain because that I'm not even there yet to safety to say like, it's not a threat. Cause I'd be like, sure it is. And then I would talk to him. Yeah, well, he doesn't need to. Well, he's fine, Lori, chill your boots, So I find that saying out loud, really naming it and that's just learning skills like that, is like when you name it and naming it out loud, like diffuse that threat to like a 1, whereas in the moment it felt like a 7.5. But right now I'm primed and ready. And so I have to be aware of that. But people don't realize how much that they are living in a state of primed and ready because they've had these events in their life that they feel that they don't want to actually look at, because the amount of regret that they'd feel and shame that they would feel, they would never come out of it. And what ends up happening is it only intensifies for you trying to run your accountability of looking back and saying, I participated in it. This is how, this is what I need to do differently. And I'm going to move forward in that way. Because right now you mix up shame and guilt and you identify in, oh my God, that's who I am. They were right about me all along. That's not what that is. But you will then only compound it, and you will be more and more primed and ready, and more things will seem like a threat, and more people, friends, family, even your closest people. If that makes sense?
Absolutely. And I
It was
think
a whole
even a byproduct of that, though, because so much kind of ties into that victim shame and blame.
Correct.
And so in addition to that, when those shifts happen around you, if you're still spiraling in that state, because our ego and our brain thinks, well, it can't possibly be me or something I've done. It's they did this by me. They, this, that, this. If you're saying a lot of that and constantly pointing outward, more than likely there needs to be some inward conversation. But
or the excuses too. I only did that because the only reason that I said that was because I did that, but you did that.
We also had, apparently we had a lot of deep conversation at the beach, folks. Also, there's another side story about the water being full of
we got to end with that
water.
We got to end with that.
Circle back talking about shame. Oh my gosh. Anyways, little teaser plot twist. But when you say but obviously I've been navigating a new love relationship over the last 9 months, and I had done so much healing work prior to getting in this, but it's not something I was seeking or looking for. And there is no denying that given my life experience in recent times, I am still unpacking, evolving, examining, meeting versions of myself, and still I was in my rawest form, but I would say I'm in this raw, exposed state still, which is a wonderful learning state if you recognize that there's that opportunity. But when navigating with another person, there's certain things that will happen that trigger unhealed parts of me and automatically make me want to go, because it's exactly those conversations of, this is my experience, or this is how you came across. Can we talk about that? And instantly I can feel myself want to do but do you know how much I've been through, all those things start to want to come to the surface. And one thing that I have found so effective, and is definitely not something that I had practiced previously in this life, because I realize I'm definitely a percolator, a marinator. And so the amount of times I've said, I'm hearing that, I'd like to marinate for a little bit before I respond. The efficacy of taking that time so that I can regulate, because those triggered parts are so surface, they're easier to trip, right? And so actually understanding and recognizing this feels like this, and then having somebody that at least has a high enough emotional EQ to recognize taking that space isn't about them, it's for the productivity of the conversation and the learning that's to come together,
right,
has been so beneficial. But I guess I kind of share that of being every single time Lori and I come to the table with these conversations, it's never because we've figured it all out. And
oh God, no. But you don't live there. You visit there. That's the thing too, is I'm not it's great. Never happens ever again. Fuck, of course it does, but I don't live there. And when I visit there and it happens, it's so much quicker to recognize it and to move through it and be like, whoa, what was up? And then I can tap into practicing, empathizing with myself and having compassion with myself and being like, dude, you are you still have ripple effects of identifying as a bad person, a selfish person, a bratty person, a whatever the verbiage is that's running around, that that little being in you or that part of you kicked up right now. So you got some more work to do to let her know that it's like, I promise you, I don't see you that way. I promise you that like, that's not how that works. But you got to remember when you've had years and years and years of doing it a certain way and neurologically wiring yourself around a response and, different parts that have had the loud, megaphone of it all, that it's like, they're going to come through with a little bit of like, hello. And you're going to be like, no, hey, but it's not about, it's not about perfection. It's about the evolution of, because you're not going to just, I just tapped my microphone. It's not going to be a switch from one to the other. It's going to be a forever evolution. And the more that you look at it as, oh God, I did that thing again, versus getting curious of like, whoa, where'd that one come up from? That's the journey of it all. And it's never going to be, I don't see a world in which it won't be some part of me. It just definitely isn't going to be the one that is in the driver's seat. And it used to be. So I love that you say that, Chrissy, because it's like, we're not coming from a pedestal or a soapbox of it. It's a lived experience to say, my God, it can change everything. And Brene Brown does incredible research on this, the social scientist, that she, literally, that's what she does, is for shame and guilt and vulnerability. And this is a huge one for that.
It's funny. I actually on my nightstand have, I thought it was just me.
That's a good one for this.
Yeah. As soon as you said it, I was like, that's so funny. I'm reading that and rereading Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And then I know we've had Rochelle on recently that said there's another Cheryl Strayed book that's well worth, that I can't remember the name of. So that means you have to listen to more episodes
to find out.
On that note.
Can you say the book again so they can hear?
You know what's so funny is you said that and then my brain just blanked and I'm like, I don't know if I can.
I thought it was Just Me by Brene Brown. It's so good. And it is exactly
my brain went doo-doo-doo. I was like, I don't know where that knowledge just went. But
it would the bubble away.
Left, folks. There's still
right. Well, are we headed into motivation, or what do we feel like?
I think so. Motivation.
Forgive yourself.
Please.
But not too soon feel the guilt.
Yeah. And on the topic of feeling the things, one important thing to recognize, there is a difference between reflection and ruminating. And I think it's important to highlight that. So one is going to lead to insight, your reflection. The other, if you're ruminating, is going to lead to stuckness. And I think it's important to just start motivation maintenance by highlighting the fact that is a very real reality. Girl. And if you aren't consciously invested in doing the work, you might fall down the ruminating path. So I think it's just, if all of a sudden you find yourself in a life cycle of this, not to be like there's a right or wrong way, but you're doing it wrong. No.
But you're fucking it up.
We know I love a journal prompt. And I think that this is a great way to revisit those parts of yourself. I think especially applicable to the story I shared in my professional life, where I had the situation happen in 2020 and really didn't get to the bottom of unpacking and moving that through till 2024. So we're talking a 4-year spread. And I did that with the help of therapy and obviously a lot of growth in between that allowed me to have myself cracked open enough to shine a little light on those shadows where you're like, whoa, God, didn't know so much was living under there. But use your journal to write a letter from your past self to your current self. So you can express the regret, be honest. Like that is a key, because I guess as honest as our brains allow, because we know that our recorders sometimes can interpret our facts with their own perception, but it's your journal. So don't skirt the facts, but be compassionate. Then respond with a letter from your future self, offering the advice, support, and encouragement on how you're going to use the regret to make better choices moving forward. And that's just like a great way Number one, if you're journaling, and maybe it's a different modality for you, but I find that for me personally, one of the most effective ways to use and process and get out stuck emotion. Maybe it's through art. I mean, I think all our creative abilities are just a wonderful way to be an excavation tool. But when you do this journal prompt, the key is finishing with that actionable step, or that what would I do differently? And the other key is being very compassionate to those parts of yourself, because at the end of the day, they're just little versions of you and little soul sparks that misaligned more than likely from self and intuition. And that's a constant dance that we have in this life, but we need to be giving ourselves compassion. Even, I mean, Lori, you and I shared some light stories, but when it comes to regret, the wells can be very deep depending on what they're centered around. So I don't want to speak lightly to how intense this work may be, but you don't need to stay there if you're feeling that gut punch, or you have those moments where previous things in your life are waking you up in the heart of the night.
Yeah, really well said. And like we said, the intensity of it, we spoke to waking up with sweats. Like when your body's having a visceral reaction to the feeling, the intensity, it can be that intense, but that means that that's meant to come through you and out of you, so long as you're not attaching a bunch of thoughts. Now, I just want to highlight, because it goes, stay in the reflective state, not in the rumination state. And I just want to add a little component, or piggyback off of that, because you could be like, well, what's the difference? How do I know? When you're in a reflective state, you can use things like asking yourself why, how, when, where, and it's to you, not about them. So it's asking yourself of like, where could I have done it differently? How can I show up that aligns with my value system? What was I feeling when I reacted that way? What could I have done differently with that feeling so I could respond? So you're asking yourself reflective, poignant questions. When you're in a state of rumination, you're playing back a storyline, and where you're trying to create a new storyline. Or if only this storyline did happen, then this could look differently. Your brain's in a state of like fear and survival. And so you either are going to rein it in with asking it like reflection, or you're going to try and utilize that part that says, if I can recognize the storyline that eliminates the threat. And that's the danger, because you have an endless source of storylines that you can create. And if but you don't really recognize in that moment. So you think, if I could just get the storyline that eliminates this feeling, what it ends up doing is it doesn't eliminate the feeling. So you create another storyline and another storyline, or a storyline that feeds the feeling. And then you have that storyline over and over and over and over and over again. And now that train's left the motherfucking station. And so if that helps
to highlight.
That's the difference between ruminating or a example. I shouldn't say it's a example of it. Mine is for the messy feeling, because that's the part that I think we are so unpracticed at as a society, as people. It's so new to us. From someone that was so obsessed with like human behavior and feelings and stuff, it's only something that I have like become practiced in. And I'm still just like in my infancy in so many ways, because it's only just really being acknowledged, and in neuroscience even being like, yeah, we got to really like this. That turns out it's a thing and we should pay attention. So when you get that feeling of that like guilt or that this, if you can, don't talk to somebody. That's the other thing we utilize is like, we'll call up and be like, I'm feeling this way and this, because what also a lot of people's first responses are to absolve you of the feeling. You're not that. Don't think that. And then it ends up playing to the part. So if you can help it, if you're overwhelmed, like completely overwhelmed, yes, find a source, but don't find a source that's going to placate you. Find a source that's going to hold space for you if you can, because you don't want to have a support system of bypassing the feeling. So if you can, create a little bit of a space for yourself, go into the other room, go into a bathroom, go into a bedroom, whatever it is, but you're going to go and you create a little space and you're going to focus on the feeling, and it's going to be painful and really fucking uncomfortable. That's how you know you're doing it right. So that, to be very clear, And you're
Something to
like,
look
why would,
forward to.
yeah. And you're like, but why would I do it? I'm like, because it helps you to process it and get it out. And then you don't take it out on the person that drives in front of you or the friend that says the thing. You get it the fuck out of your system. And then you get the lesson on the other side. That's why it's
Do
worth
the
it.
work so it doesn't become everyone else's problem. Damn it.
100%. And it compounds. You're like, how do I keep ending up here? I've got a hint. This is one of them. So you go, you lay, sit, whatever works. I'm a layer. And then wherever the feeling, mine usually shows up in my chest and my stomach. So I put a hand on the spot that it's happening to, and I focus all my thoughts and I actually focus on it. I'm like, oh my God, oh, this is uncomfortable. Like, oof, da, 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 da. I'm not ruminating because I'm not adding thoughts to it. I'm not adding a story. Oh God, she or he or they gave me this feeling. And if only I wouldn't even be here. I'm not doing that. And my brain's going to want to. So that's why I just go, oof, focus on the feeling. Focus on the feeling. Sometimes I have to say it out loud, but I just sit with it. I'll hum into it sometimes because humming activates the parasympathetic for your nervous system to say, I'm safe, I'm this kind of thing. I'm going to give it a little help, but I'm not trying to bypass it. I'm just trying to like support it in its processing. And so I just do that until it's at until like I'm at a 2 out of 10. I kind of gauge things. I can't get up until I'm like a 4 and under. A 4 and under in my regulated system says I can manage and move life without projecting it onto something else, transferring it onto someone or something else. And I've processed it at least enough that like it's not going to get stuck in my body. So that's kind of the like quick version of a way to actually process the feeling and just breathe into it. And the other little tidbit on that you can add to it that's super, super helpful. Chrissy mentioned it with her journaling, compassion. So if you feel like you can manage it, think of it as like a little baby almost. Like think of the feeling as like, how would you care for a baby that was kicking and screaming and crying and hungry or in pain or whatever it is, right? You wouldn't be like,
Put it in a room and shut the door.
Put it in a room, shut the door and say, when you're ready to behave, you can come out. Because the compassion bit helps with the processing, but the compassion bit also helps you in the future because you're wiring and associating when I feel this feeling, I feel also the feeling of compassion. So it also helps you wire your system and your new habitual way of having these experiences, right? That's what happened on the street. Whoa, you're safe. I felt like when I said it, I wasn't like, whoa, you're safe. Chill your boots. I was like, whoa, you are safe. Chill your boots, girl. And it became kind of funny to me. And that helped me. That helped me for the rest of the day, not just in that moment. So these are things that like, it sounds like it takes time and it does, but it will save you so much time and grievance. And because the amount of time that you spend running from yourself, this is a blip on the radar of the time that you are actually investing in avoiding this rather than turning towards it, utilizing it, and then having the fucking gift that's on the other side of it. The gift, truly. It's just one that comes in some prickly wrapping paper.
Always. Like, why does life love that wrapping paper so much?
Because we don't do a lot of movement in the good times. We just like to revel in it. And so pain is a moving force and it makes, it makes us not touch the hot stove again. So our skin, like it's all kind of makes sense when you really break it down. But you also are like, I wish it was different.
Before we get to our quote, because now we teased it, but the like painfully hilarious moment for some swimmers.
Oh.
Lori and I, obviously,
so
this whole episode stemmed from a trip to the beach. And I think both of us witnessed something that we never have at the beach before. 2 people, golden hour, getting their swim on, lovely boats going by in the background, sizzling heat and all the goodness.
Everyone's chilling on the beach. It's a smaller little beach and it's quite intimate and everyone's with their little crew of friends or someone just like looking out and taking in the scenery. And then we hear on the megaphone.
Lifeguard jumps into action with a megaphone and says,
you're going to want to come out of the water. It's not safe to swim. That's why there's signs everywhere. You need to come out, and this is how he's talking. You need to come out immediately. And once you do, you're going to want to rinse off immediately. You and he would pause in between, and we were
It
like,
went
oh,
So it was about a 30 to 40-second
yes.
lecture, with the lecture basically letting them know they were quite literally swimming
in feces.
poop.
Yep. You are in poop water. We've warned you to not swim in poop water, yet you have swum in poop water. And now you're probably highly contaminated. Do not waste another second, you stupid idiot that's already wasted all this time in feces water.
And then pop the poop water immediately.
Immediately.
Oh my God, we died laughing. Even Lori was like, there's not a lot of things that embarrass me, but that would have embarrassed me.
I would have walked out and been like, please don't look at my face. Please don't identify me. Please don't look at my soul. I've just swam in poop water publicly.
Yeah. So speaking of regrets,
they had some
my quote to close.
Yes, they had some that day.
What part of me was like, that story doesn't tie in at all, but there we go. It's circled.
Sure does. Sure does.
This is Daniel H. Pink, author of The Power of Regret. Regret is one of our most powerful emotional signals. It is a teacher, not a tormentor.
Yeah, it's not the boogeyman. It's your fairy godmother. Brene Brown. Regret is one of the most powerful emotional reminders that we have the capacity for empathy, growth, and moral agency. And that, my friends, is your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Laura Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.